All right, class, welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the big ones. We're going to tackle one of the most famous and honestly one of the most misunderstood arguments for God's existence, the fifth way of Thomas Aquinas. You'll often hear it called the argument from design. So let's really get in there and unpack it. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with a concept that you all actually use in your science classes. You just might not know the philosophical name for it. Then, we'll trace that idea back through medieval philosophy all the way to ancient Greece. From there, we'll break down Aquinas' actual argument, clear up a huge, and I mean huge modern misconception, and then we'll see why this 800-year-old idea still has us asking some really big questions today. Okay, let's kick things off with something that's actually pretty intuitive. It's an idea wrapped up in a simple question that every kid asks and every scientist asks. What is this for? I want you to really think about this. When a biologist is studying an animal, they're not just making a list of its parts, right? They're trying to figure something else out. They're asking, what do these things do? What's their function? And that right there is the key. You only understand a heart as a heart because you know its purpose, its end is to pump blood. You know what lungs are because their purpose is to get oxygen into the body. Physiology makes sense of anatomy. We figure out what things are by understanding what they're for. This way of thinking has a name. It's called teleology. It's basically the study of ends or purposes. And that Greek word, telos, is super important. It doesn't just mean ends like a finish line. It also means perfection, the point where a thing has become the best version of itself. Okay, so let's see how this simple idea of what's it for gets built into a much more formal philosophical framework. Now, I know in your physics classes, a cause is usually just one thing hitting another. But for these older thinkers, it was a way bigger concept. For them, to truly explain something, you had to ask 4 questions, which gave you the 4 causes. What's it made of? That's the material cause, the bronze of a statue. What is it? That's the formal cause, the idea or blueprint of the statue. Who made it? The efficient cause, the sculptor. But the most important one for them was always the last one. What is it for? That's the final cause. Now look at this quote. Aquinas calls the final cause the cause of causes. Why would he say that? Well, think about it. The purpose is what starts the whole chain reaction. The sculptor's goal to honor a hero, the end, is what makes him get the bronze, pick up his tools, and start working. The final cause is what puts all the other causes into motion. And here's the thing you absolutely have to get. Aquinas didn't invent this stuff. This whole way of thinking, this teleological framework, comes from Aristotle, a pagan philosopher in Greece hundreds of years before Christianity even existed. Aristotle was just a sharp observer of how rational people operate. We always start with the goal, an end. A doctor doesn't sit around wondering if she should heal someone. Healing is the whole point. She just figures out the best way to get there. We start with the end in mind, and we work backward to find the means. And here's where he makes a massive leap. Aristotle thought this wasn't just a human thing. He thought the entire universe was ordered toward ends. An acorn's telos is to become a mighty oak tree. A rock's telos is to fall towards the center of the earth. He saw nature as a system of things striving to achieve what's best for them. Okay, so with that whole background on teleology and final causes under our belt, we are finally ready to look at Aquinas' famous arguments. He basically takes Aristotle's worldview and asks one incredibly powerful question about it. So Aquinas starts with something you can just see by looking around. Things that don't have brains, plants, rocks, rivers, you name it, they act in very regular, predictable ways. They act, as he says, always or nearly always in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. An acorn becomes an oak, not a daisy. Gravity always pulls things down. There's an order to it all. So the question is, how can a thing without a mind act for a purpose? To explain this, Aquinas gives us a brilliant analogy. Think about an arrow. It's just a piece of wood and feathers. It has no mind, no goal. If it's going to hit a target, its end, it can't get there by itself. It needs an intelligent archer to aim it and let it fly. And that's the logic of the whole argument. Just like the arrow flying toward its target points to an archer who aimed it, the goal-directed behavior of every unintelligent thing in the universe points to a single, universal intelligence that directs all of nature toward its proper end. And that universal director, Aquinas says, is what we call God.
Okay, everybody, lean in for this part.
It is absolutely critical that we get this next point right, because Aquinas' argument is almost always confused with a modern idea, and they are totally different things. Aquinas is not making what's called a God of the gaps argument. He's not the intelligent design guy. He's not looking at something complex like an eyeball and saying, wow, that's too complicated to have happened by chance, so God must have put the pieces together like a watchmaker. No, his argument is way deeper. He's talking about final causality, the fact that things have an intrinsic nature, an internal principle that directs them to their goal. He's asking, where did that goal-directed nature come from in the first place? Now, I know the first thing that jumps into your minds is probably, hold on, Professor, what about Darwin? Doesn't evolution explain all of this? It's the right question to ask, but it's arguably talking about a different kind of purpose. Think it through. Evolution explains that giraffes have long necks because their ancestors with slightly longer necks had more babies. It explains function by looking backwards at what happened to work out in the past. For Aquinas, real teleology requires a mind that's looking forwards to a future goal. So while evolution is a brilliant explanation for the mechanism of how things adapt, Aquinas would say it doesn't answer the deeper question. Why is nature a system where these kinds of goal-oriented processes happen at all? So why are we wrestling with this today? I mean, it's an 800-year-old argument from a monk. It matters because it frames a fundamental question about the kind of universe we live in. This argument really forces us to pick a side between two totally different ways of seeing everything. Is the universe at its core ordered and meaningful? Is science the act of discovering a real, rational order that's already there? Or is the universe just the product of blind material forces, and any purpose we think we see is just an illusion our brain cooks up to make sense of the chaos? If you take that second view to its logical conclusion, things get pretty weird. If you completely deny final causality, you're on a path to saying the world is fundamentally absurd, that there's no inherent reason or order to it. And in a universe like that, what is science even doing? If there's no underlying rational order to discover, then maybe science is just us imposing our own made-up patterns on randomness. And that is the question Aquinas leaves us with. The fifth way isn't just some dusty old proof you memorize for an exam. It's a profound challenge. It forces you to ask whether all of this, the universe, our lives, everything, is just an arrow shot off into the dark at random, or if it's an arrow that was aimed at a target from the very beginning. And that's something worth thinking about.